how to overcome the fear of going to an Orthodox church. I want to convert, but I'm shy.
Yeah. This is a really common problem, I think. Yeah. Or a common, question. A lot of people that come into the church have like waited a year, 2 years to even step foot, because they see things online, they want to come, but it's hard to make the first encounter. I think there's nothing to say than other just you got to force yourself to go, you know? There's something about skinning your knees in becoming Orthodox that really shapes and forms the spiritual life. So there is that aspect. You're not going to learn to skateboard or ride a bike or whatever without falling a few times. And if that initial fear holds one back, they're never going to do it, never going to accomplish it. But it's part of it, when you fall, when you skin your knee, when you get bruised up a little bit, it's part of it, and then after you enter the church, and there's all these other things, right? You're going to skin your knee on and be bruised up with, and it's part of that hardening for the spiritual life. But there's nothing better in the world than being immersed into a divine liturgy. And everybody that I have, come in contact with in the church that has had this trepidation in going and they've prolonged visiting has always said after their first few visits, I wish I had done this, a year ago or months ago or whatever, because all of the trepidation was just washed away during the divine liturgy because of the palpable experience that one has with God during the service and being in his holy temple and all of those things. Of course, there's going to be the, when do I cross myself? When do I do this? When do I do that? And a lot of times people already studied on all this kind of stuff, right? They come into the church for the first time, they have a head covering on, they're crossing themselves, and we always think, oh, that person must be just Orthodox, but it's the first time they're here. But there's something good also about not knowing what icons to venerate first, and not knowing what this community does, because every community has its own flavor of certain aspects, maybe not during the divine liturgy, but for their communal life, And so there's still a fear there, but so many people that have that fear that come in always regret waiting, continue to postpone it, right? And wishing they did it previously so that they could carry this divine grace, this peace that they're searching for, that doesn't come through videos, that doesn't come through audio, that doesn't come through reading, that they wish that they had that sooner. Yeah.
Is it a sin to not fast on a fasting day like Wednesday if you're going out?
Yes, it is a sin not to fast on a fasting day. Even if you're going out, I always tell people, heathens are vegan, right? And there are many people who devote themselves to an entire vegan life who do not know God, who do not practice Christianity, who do not know who Christ is, who do not have the ascetical life, and none of those contexts, that are receiving no spiritual reward from it, that are doing it because of a philosophy or because of a diet, right? There are people who do that their entire life. And so it's a little bit, cowardly of us as Orthodox Christians to make excuses for doing it when we're doing it for a greater purpose and to receive countless rewards and blessings for it. It's hard. I know people have diet issues. I know that especially with the way foods are made today, it's not the easiest thing. Sometimes there's a huge philosophical block that has to be overcome with it. But the reward that comes from it is something that you're not going to get if you continue to make excuses for yourself. We should only bend the rules of the fasting of the church if the priest bends them for us out of economia, out of a special blessing, because somebody's a diabetic or somebody has certain chronic issues or is pregnant or whatever it may be. There's some specific things that make people in the church not accountable for the fullness of the fast, but there's other things in which the priest can look to see to help people. But at the end of the day, we want to try to keep the bar as high as we can for ourselves, because it's the way that we stretch ourselves to overcome sins and passions. If we can't order something vegan at a restaurant, which is another thing, every restaurant you go to, you're going to find something that you can eat on a fast day. If we can't go there and select the vegan option, then when it comes down to real problems and real passions and temptations, then we're not going to pick the holy thing to do, So it's a way to temper yourself, to say no to the flesh, and to allow the spiritual life to be fed, allow the soul to have control over the body, and to begin to work and to cure different passions that we all suffer from.
Advice for older, single Orthodox women who are giving up on God providing a husband.
Yeah, it's different. The husband, the marriage aspect, finding a husband or finding a wife, the anxiety that goes in with that is so popular. I think that the greatest advice that I've heard from older priests is to look to Christ as your bridegroom and focus on him, be united with him, and in God's time, he will send someone or something into your life that fulfills this need that one has, that's one's craving or one's thirsting for. If we're continually on the lookout all of the time, and we're neglecting Christ and neglecting the spiritual life, then number one, we won't be ready for a spouse. And number two, we will exhaust ourselves because we are always putting in our own effort and not waiting for the providence of God to come and to work in our life.
My boyfriend wants to be a priest. Him and I intend to get married. Advice for the future.
Ooh. If someone or a couple is looking towards the life of the priesthood or wants to enter and be initiated into the priesthood, the number one foundation that they have to have is an active spiritual life as a family. Number one. You're not going to gain that at seminary. You actually be probably too exhausted for it at seminary if you want to, develop it there. It's not going to get developed. So the number one thing is that one needs to be grounded in a prayer life and the liturgical life of the church. If one makes excuses for themselves, is absent during divine services, skips their prayers all the time, this is the life of a priest is not for them. It's not for them, because the demonic warfare that comes with the priesthood and with the administration of a parish will crush a family if they don't have a solid foundation, a solid spiritual foundation. So if someone is looking to that kind of life, they need to have this grounded prayer life. They need to be close to a spiritual father that will give them a blessing to go, that will help them in their spiritual struggles during seminary, because there will be a lot of spiritual struggles during seminary. Sometimes there is not great spiritual guides around the seminary, depending on where a person goes or what time they go or whatever it may be. You can't rely on it, I should say then. One has to be close to a spiritual father. One has to have a grounded prayer life and allow for a time for their marriage to be solidified before entering into seminary, because there's going to be a lot of tension, a lot of times where the husband has to be gone for certain things, and there's struggle. Seminary life is a struggle. And if there's not some fusion of this couple together in a spiritual way before seminary, it can become problematic, So having a solid foundation in prayer life, being close to spiritual father, having a foundation set in their marriage beforehand will be great benefits. It will be a great benefit to them.
Can priests hear the confession of catechumens?
Yes, priests can hear the confession of catechumens, and it's a very popular practice for many priests to begin to hear the confession of catechumens after they're initiated into the catechumenate. Now, of course, that's different than sacramental confession. There's not the sacramental absolution that can be given to a catechumen, but it's important for the catechumen to get into the life of confession, to learn how to confess, but also it gives the priest an insight to who this person is, right? And it helps the priest guide them through their catechumenate as well, because people come with so many spiritual ailments to the church, and it's like going to a new doctor. If you go to a new doctor and you don't bring any of your medical history and you don't give him any kind of insight to what you're feeling, what you're ailing from, what your family history is and your genetics or whatever, he's going to be starting from a really narrow, approach to your medical life, and whereas if you were to bring all of those things, he could give a more robust, rounded view of where you are and what should be implemented and things like that. And so the same thing is with the catechumen and the priest. It's good to get this spiritual medical background, if you will, on the soul of that person, to be able to guide them through the various hurdles and aspects of their catechumenate, to know and get an idea if they're ready for baptism or not, if they're ready to be initiated into the mysteries of Christ, and things like that. So it's a great practice to have, and many priests do it. And I'm sure that even if a catechumen asks a priest that maybe doesn't practice it all the time or openly, that the priest would be willing to, or should be willing to hear their confession and get their sins, out in the open to another person that can begin to put ointment on them and to heal them and give them things to do during their prayer rules and things like that, their fasting regimen, to help guide them and navigate them through spiritual healing.
Hi, Father. Please, could you give some advice on how to forgive? I'm really struggling.
We have such big egos today. Father Seraphim would joke about this. He said, the me generation goes hesychist, meaning people come to Orthodoxy, they're so obsessed with themselves because this culture has ingrained in them this mindset that they are special, that they're something that should be held in high esteem, et cetera, et cetera. We grew up with this mindset. It builds over time, and it manifests itself in our life in ways that we don't even see, right? And so it's important when we come across various things that we know are ego-driven to cut them off completely. There should be a slow dying of the ego in order for the spiritual life to be made manifest. So when we come to a place where we cannot forgive another person, it's mainly due to our ego that we cannot forgive. Of course, there are aspects where somebody is maybe wounded and has a hard time forgiving because an immense amount of trauma, and that takes a spiritual father to help guide that person through and maybe set up boundaries for that person with other people and things like that. So there are more, detailed ways to deal with it when it is a deeper issue. But when we're offended by someone and we cannot forgive, this is when things become that we look and we can see in ourselves that there is a spiritual problem. That the ego is big and it cannot let go of certain things. And so the number one way in which to force ourselves to forgive is to ask for forgiveness from another person, even if we are in the wrong, and to make prostrations before people and before our icon corner to humble ourselves in order to forgive. We also have to employ the prayers of the saints and ask the Lord to give us a spirit of forgiveness. To look to Christ and the icon of Christ and look at his holy face and say, "You've commanded me to forgive my enemies, but I cannot even forgive my brother. Give me a heart of forgiveness. Squash my ego, crucify my ego, so that I can learn to forgive and to follow your commandments." These prayers that acknowledge our sinfulness and ask God to stoke within us humility will give us the courage to learn to forgive people more freely.
How do I know if something is God's will in my life?
Yeah, that can be a really detailed question depending on what it is. Sometimes we get caught up in wanting God to intervene and appear or a voice come down from heaven and tell us the answer to a problem, where we're going to live, what school we're going to go to, if we leave this job, what in our life, we're doing. We want God's answer, and we feel like maybe that answer is not coming, A really holy spiritual mother told me one time, Yirandisa told me one time, that you decide to do something. If you do not hear from God and you're trying to make a decision about something, it's because God wants you to learn something about this decision spiritually, right? And to mature spiritually. So she said, you make a decision, you kind of look and weigh your options and you choose the best decision, what would be the best for you spiritually. And you say to God, may it be blessed. This is what I'm going to do. May it be blessed. And you carry out doing that and going through with this decision, putting your eggs in that basket, if you will, but always being open to God interfering and praying that if it is not blessed, that God would show you that it's not blessed and slam a door in your face, So we put our eggs in a certain basket. We might not, quote unquote, hear from God, but we say, may be blessed, slam a door in my face if it's not blessed, and we continue on that path. And then many times the door does slam in our face, and we're shown what we're really supposed to be doing, and God intervenes, but we have to be open for God to intervene, and we have to ask for his blessing to do certain things. Of course, this goes all in the context of asking a spiritual father and being part of a community and things like that, because maybe a spiritual father will say that you're not ready to move. That's not going to be a good spiritual thing for you, and give an answer. And that answer does come from God, right? Sometimes you may be doing something in the community and the community says, look, that's probably not good for you. You're working on Sundays and you're not here all the time, or you're doing this job and maybe you should find another job because you can't come to divine services and you're not part of this community and things like that, right? So the community and the spiritual father help round that out as well. But, when we come to a spiritual father, again, we're not getting these answers. Many times the priest will tell us, we'll choose to do something and pray and ask God for his blessing and ask it for it to be taken away if it's not, his will.
As a deaf guy, I like going to the church, but I don't understand what the priests are saying, so I don't understand anything. What's your recommendation for me?
Oh, it's difficult. What a cross to have. What a cross to have. I think the beautiful thing, the treasure that we have, the beautiful thing and the treasure from the lives of the saints is their crosses that they bear. That many times it seems in their life that nobody else had that cross, and they struggled through it. And that is how they found Christ. So various diseases or ailments in the lives of the saints is what saved them in many ways. Saint Nicephorus the leper, who we really love in this parish and who's worked a lot of miracles for us in this parish, he struggled with leprosy since he was 13. And that came with all sorts of impediments. It came with all sorts of constrictions and crosses that many of us could not even fathom of enduring, And so a cross like that is a hard struggle. It is very, very difficult because maybe it seems as if that person is the only one with the cross in that parish. And perhaps because of the inability to understand that they can't hear from God or something like this, or that they're shut out in some way, or a door is closed to them in some way. But in reality, this cross is how a person enters deeper into the spiritual life. Of course, there's maybe some physical things that could help in talking to the priest or people of the parish to help to facilitate certain things or needs for this person. Someone to do sign language or whatever it may be. Maybe somebody in the parish takes up that cross in order to help this person by learning sign language and doing their best to be able to translate certain things for them. So there are physical things, of course, but really this cross is what somebody can use and embrace in order to enter into a deeper spiritual life, into a quietude that is prayer and contemplation of God. The sermons in the church, the liturgy, the singing in the church, all the sound of the church, of course, is mixed with everything else that goes into divine services that gives this rich banquet for us. But they are all ways to enter us into a quietude with God, the encounter with Christ. And so various crosses are given to different people, some larger than others, some seemingly larger than others, that are supposed to mark our renewal, our personal connection with God, our personal encounter with Him. So what I would say to this person is, yes, while there are things that probably can be done in the parish as far as physical things that can facilitate this person's needs, to really embrace this cross that God has given, and in order to enter into a deep life of prayer, guided hopefully by the priest and guided by these saints who suffered so much for their faith and to stoke within them this genuine fire for the spiritual life in order to retreat with God and have silence with God and these kinds of things. So I would tell this person to embrace the cross in order to enter into this deeper life, while at the same time also, of course, looking at some practical things that maybe can be done in the parish and maybe something that a priest or a parishioner can facilitate for them.
Can you be proud of someone, for example, a friend, a coworker, etc., or is it still a sin of pride? What is the border between good praise and the sin of pride?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. Yes, we can definitely be proud of someone. We can be proud of our children. We can be proud of our parish. We can be proud of our country, our nationality. We can be proud of, friends that emulate good things in this life, because it's the way that we venerate them, right? It's a type of veneration, I should say. That's a better way of saying it. It's a type of veneration because we see the good deeds, or we see the Spirit of God made manifest, or we see virtue in a person, and so we want to emulate it, we venerate it, we see God working in it, and we praise Him because of it. So yes, we can be proud in that aspect of certain people. We have to be careful with praise, because sometimes praise can be a poison for someone who maybe has an inclination to pride or something like that. So we have to be careful with that, of course. But when the sin of pride really creeps in, where a line, is crossed, is when we exalt ourselves above other people. So if we're proud of our friend, but we say, well, we have the best friend, or we're proud of our children, but we think our children are the best and most venerable children, right? This is where it begins to cross the line, because now we're not venerating another person and knowing ourselves as lesser than that person and wanting to emulate them and things like that, but we're now using it as a way to stoke up our own ego. Like, I have this friend, I have this person, I know this person, and that makes me somehow better than other people because I have this connection with this or that person. So where it crosses the line into sin is when it becomes self-absorbed, and when we begin to exalt ourselves. This is with all of the virtues when they cross over to being vices, right? Love is selfless. It is martyrdom. It is crucifixion for another person. It is laying our life down for someone else, for a friend, a neighbor, a spouse, a child. But when it crosses over into lust, this is all about ourself, a self-gratification. And it's all consumed with the ego, So this is how every virtue, in many ways, becomes a vice, is when it starts to stoke up this self-asserting pride that we have, self-pleasure, self-exaltation, all that kind of a thing. That's when it becomes very toxic. That's when it becomes a sin. So yes, we can be proud of our children, we can be proud of a friend, we can be proud of a coworker, things like that. But we do it in a way, and that is proper, maybe veneration of a person, and not in a way that stokes our own ego to put ourselves above another person.
How do we go from praying from the mind to an inner prayer from the heart?
It's a really complex and complicated question, and I hesitate to answer it fully just because there's something about, if you've not experienced it, you're inevitably going to leave out something and not give the full picture, but we do read about this in the lives of the fathers. We hear it in homilies about descending the mind into the heart, and we see it in the Neptic Fathers and the Philokalia and very rich, beautiful spiritual writings. There is definite battle that the fathers talk about in order to do so, that a mind has to be purified, that a heart has to be purified. Some of kind of cave dwellers or hermit ascetics talk about this descent from the mind to the heart as being this one with a lot of obstacles that has to be, gone through, and things like that. But we really should, when we come into the church, we really have to be aware of who we are and aware of our sins and our passions and what stages of the spiritual life we are at. And like Father Seraphim said, how far we are from the Holy Fathers. And so we really have to have a good idea of ourselves as people before we even begin to contemplate this kind of a thing. When we're more set in the church and grounded and have a good spiritual father and things like that, then it's the spiritual father who's the one who guides one to descend the mind into the heart. And hopefully a spiritual father that has experienced it maybe an older spiritual father that has experienced it. I can only talk about it because I've read about it, but as far as experiencing something like that, I am probably the last priest to talk to about it, but I know at least on like in a manual sense that there are steps, right? And that first step is for a person first to begin to purify their mind and their heart, to go to confession, to live just a simple Orthodox life, to observe fasting. Sometimes we become overzealous, or we hear about these kinds of things through books or videos or whatever before we even step into the church, or maybe we're only a year in a catechumenate or whatever. And I've had people ask me questions, they read the life of St. Joseph the Hesychist, they read other from his writings and things like that. They want to implement some things that are like high spiritual practices, right? And they have a hard time fasting on Wednesday and Friday. You know what I mean? So we have to see like where we're really at. If we have a hard time fasting on Wednesday and Friday, and we have a hard time keeping our prayer rule, this question of descending the mind to the heart is completely foreign to who we are, right? And there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and a lot of foundation that needs to be laid before we even begin to attempt those things. Of course, a spiritual father hopefully walks someone through this process to get to the place where they can begin to learn over a process of years and things like that. We forget, the sweat and the toil and the blood and the tears that ascetics have shed in order to achieve this, and we think that we who are on our phones all the time and eating whatever we want and missing a divine service here or there and making excuses for ourselves, that we're ever going to even understand what they were talking about and understand their experience. So we have to really start from step one and learn this gradually over time and not try to reach up and overachieve, because when we try to reach up and overachieve, specifically without a blessing, we enter into a very dangerous aspect of the spiritual life, and that is that aspect of demonic delusion, right? And Father Seraphim was very big on this, that when a person does something without a blessing and they try to attain to a spiritual experience that they're not ready for, or they're trying to skip steps to get there, they want to be, on step 33 while they're not even stepped on the first one yet, that this is where the concept of prelist, which is like a demonic delusion where you think you're doing something good, but it's really the demons propping you up and helping you to get to a place where they can dash you down, right? So it's important to have a spiritual guide to give us some guidance and know where we are in order to start to understand it by experience and not just by books and not by watching videos and podcasts and whatever, because there can be something really dangerous to that, Father Seraphim also wrote about St. Paisius Velishkovsky, who was one of the first to translate a lot of spiritual works into Romanian. And he omitted some things in his translations because he felt that the public in general was not ready for certain spiritual things. And so there was even a discernment among translators, even saints who were translators, on not to give certain things at the wrong time, or else they can be used in the wrong way. And so Father Seraphim saw, especially in the 70s, the popular translations of St. Gregory Palamas and things like that, and he thought, maybe the Americans are not ready for this kind of these kinds of writings yet. They have to understand who they are spiritually before they can understand these kind of more lofty concepts of the spiritual life. So even among writers and saints that translated, they had discernment. Whereas today, we can like type anything in the YouTube search bar and find, hours of lectures or interviews on various high, lofty spiritual topics that maybe we're not ready to be initiated into yet. And maybe we really need a spiritual father to help to begin to know who we are. Because it's so easy to want to do the great things, but the work really begins with the hard thing, which is beginning to plow your heart and to begin to put effort and work into the ascetic struggle. Nobody wants to do that, but everybody wants to descend the mind into the heart. So we gotta start with the steps that we're at first before we go into bigger things.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sitting down with me again, Father.
Yeah, of course. Wonderful to have you again. Yeah.